Hello, I'm Philip Stoten. I'm here at Apex 2020 and I am joined by Ron Keith and Akhil Oltikar to talk about supply chain. We're in a time of challenge for the supply chain. I don't want to dwell on that too much, but what I do want to explore is the need for supply chains to be more robust, more resilient and more agile, and how we contrast that with the desire to be economic, lean, just in time. These things kind of jar a little bit against each other right now. What are you seeing, Ron, and what do you see as the way supply chains can develop to be ready for the next coronavirus or the next Fukushima or whatever it is?
Well, I think the first issue is that people have to recognize the need for it. And the way so many people in supply chain and procurement get bonused is around one or two incredibly simple metrics that really understate the complexity of the business or the piece of the business that they're running. So the first thing is the recognition of it. Once there's recognition, we need to better understand and learn from the past. Those who are ignorant of the future, okay, let's try that one again. Those who are ignorant of the past are doomed to repeat it. And whether it was SARS, whether it was the first Gulf War, whether it was Fukushima, we've had events like this in the past. And we need to do a better job of learning from them and knowing that they're not one-off events. They are going to repeat periodically, and the results and the implications are going to be fairly similar. So how do we go build a more robust supply chain network? And it's two things. It's dividing up your means of production, and so it's multiple sourcing. It doesn't have to be multiple companies, but certainly multiple geographies that have different risk factors. So, two different factories, both in Shenzhen, that's probably not sufficient. And then what's really important that people are missing is the upstream piece of that. So even if I have done a pretty good job at diversifying my final assembly and test facilities, I've got them in different countries, I've got them with different companies, et cetera, how do I make sure that there's not a point of confluence upstream where, okay, but they're both buying from one single factory in a floodplain in Bangkok? And part of that is visibility. And so many companies today couldn't do that if they wanted to because they don't have that visibility.
Yeah.
I know that I place my orders with Pegatron. I know that I place my orders with Jabil. Upstream from them, where are things actually manufactured? Where are they shipped from? Where are they shipped through? There's just no good visibility on that.
Yeah. Let's come to you on that, Akhil, because I think visibility is a lot about what you do and what you provide your customers, but it's a bit about that supply chain management revolution that we've seen as we've moved from, kind of paper and spreadsheets and trying to figure out within a team where everything's being manufactured and where it's being sourced to having something that's visible. And, we talked about visibility and transparency before. That's a huge part of being able to see the size of the problem and being able to overcome it.
Yep. No, I think to Ron's point also, and thinking about visibility in the way that it's not about simply having the data across your supply chain in some fancy charts. The question is, what insights can you derive from the data and how quickly? As we spoke about it, where you cannot predict the future, we know that. Uncertainty is a new normal, we know that. Planning helps you mitigate those risks, but it cannot be completely nullified, all these risks which are inherent. So also to Ron's point is that unfortunately still in supply chain the urgent takes priority over the important, right? And how you're measured. We know that proactive planning will help you mitigate this because there is going to be next virus somewhere or an earthquake or a tsunami somewhere. But are you thinking about your supply chain and planning accordingly and running through various what-if scenarios to understand when it hits, what is your plan to mitigate those risks and have that resilient supply chain going forward? Visibility, and then I'll give you one perfect example. One of our customers, they have the visibility, but then the question comes is, what do you do with that? There is a stock out at in a particular region for their products, and they know that the inventory is sitting somewhere. How should you transport that and get there so that there is no lost sale? So that requires certain certain tools, certain planning processes, which can get to the answer very, very quickly. It cannot be something that will take days to get to an answer by that time you are done. So that is the other aspect of it, where the process and the tools combine together and use the visibility to make decisions faster and optimal decisions faster.
Ron, I just wanted to come back, and again, Akhil mentioned it, this thing of what people are rewarded on, what they're bonused on. Is it that supply chain managers are typically bonused on, low inventory count, lowest possible price, taking 2 points out this quarter rather than having a efficient, more robust supply chain? And how can you change that?
Well, it starts with the incentives. People are going to do what they're incentivized to do, and most of these folks are getting paid on a quarterly bonus, and it's based on quarterly metrics. And we don't typically have a global pandemic every quarter, so you can a little bit game the system. I don't know of anybody in supply chain that is not measured on PPV or the amount that they drive down the per unit purchase price on a quarter-over-quarter basis. And some companies are still doing it on an annual basis. That one is universal. Inventory turns, many people are doing that, but it's typically kind of a what are you paying versus a stock out condition, right? And so if you have a high service level, if you have low stock out, and if you're driving down the price, that tends to get most people the majority of their bonus. And so to say, hey, I've got a supply chain that runs really well in Shanghai, I'm really worried about the next event, I want to go spend 2 to 3% of my spend that year. Because that's what it's going to take. If you want to take my production from one location, split it into just the process of getting involved, finding the supplier, moving things, dividing your inventory, it's a one-time implementation cost of 2 to 3% if you're spending $100 million. If you're spending $25 million, it could be 6%. So that's a one-time cost. Where are you going to put that? Is that in my purchase price? Can I do some creative accounting and say, look, that's a one-time fee, let's not. And most of these people that are negotiating these prices aren't really good at negotiating with their boss. How are we going to go measure this? So they look at the cost of doing this, and I'm going to do it next year, I'm going to do it next quarter. And then it becomes urgent, right? Something that has been important for a decade is now urgent for the next 2 quarters. And you were asking me this morning, what can people do right now? Very little right now after the fact.
Yeah, so it's almost a little bit late to do all that, isn't it? And you talk about the importance of visibility and having all that data and being able to manage and manipulate that data. How can you use that data then to design a better supply chain once you get past the urgent and you do start to tackle the importance? What changes do you need to make? And is there software that allows you to model that in terms of costs so you avoid this situation where you're in now, where you're just looking at the cost of the part on the purchaser?
I think we all know we cannot predict the future, right? But the data that you have would tell you what you need to know so that you can take meaningful actions in the present. That's most important. So when it comes to, at least from our experience and my personal experience, is that using modeling tools to understand the impacts of events which are unpredictable. You can simulate these certain scenarios to understand what could be the impact in terms of your supply chain disruptions, your revenue lost, or your customer service levels getting affected. You would have a better handle in terms of what the impact could be, and based on that impact, you could have a contingency plan in place to mitigate those risks. I think that's because once you have the data in terms of what the impact would be, then it is fairly straightforward to explain also to the top management of what needs to put into place because it's down to the dollar numbers right there, and what should be the contingency plan to mitigate those risks. I think that's one impact of how you can use such tools. Secondly, I think the proactive planning approach, now I'm talking about more of the operational tactical planning, more of say 3 to 9 months kind of forward looking, what we have seen in the past is that companies, when they use the spreadsheets, most of them are error-prone spreadsheets, which leads to a lot of challenges. We all know that. But at the same time, once the planning run is done, that past data is discarded. And there is so much of knowledge in there in terms of what was the past run data, what were your inputs, what was the resulting outcomes, and how do you use that data to then look forward in terms of what's going to happen. I'm not talking about predicting the future, but using the historical data to understand what could be the impacts going forward. I think that those are certain ways of how you can mitigate those risks and use that data for your planning and mitigation.
Yeah, and we talk about different levels of risk and different levels of disruption. And if we look at China specifically, last year we had all kinds of issues with respect to tariffs. We get to the end of the year and then we've got to plan for Chinese New Year. We've got wage inflation going on there. There are all kinds of other challenges, and then we have this unpredictable disruption as well. At the same time, we're seeing a change in the way supply chains are designed on a global basis. Are you seeing your customers look to a more diverse, broader global footprint of manufacturing, which seems a fairly natural thing to do, or are they still chasing that single low-cost geography? Where is it cheapest? Where is it going to be cheapest next? How do I get there?
I think over the last couple of years, there has been a move towards more regionalization. I'm going to service Europe from Europe. I'm going to service Asia from Asia. I'm going to service North America from North America. And certainly not everyone, but there has been this groundswell, especially among some of the largest of the OEMs. For those companies that do quite a bit smaller volume, the benefits of regionalization can very easily get swamped by the cost of I'm going to set up 3 operations. I've got to provide 3 sets of planning inputs. I've got to oversee and audit 3 sets of factories, and so it can be daunting for the mid-sized companies to regionalize, despite the fact that most of them understand the benefits of doing so.
Yeah, and I think that's the big challenge, isn't it? It's just the size of the management of the project. Is that something you're seeing with your customers? Are they saying, hey, we need a more diverse footprint, and how do you manage that within a software ecosystem?
I think I'll give you an example. There is definitely the regionalization to what Ron referred to. What we call as the instant gratification economy that we live in right now. I have my phone, I click, I want it today, in 2 hours, if possible, right? I think that is driving a lot of these decisions in terms of how the supply chain is set up. My personal example, of course, we have customers who have looked at variety of these scenarios, and yes, there has been move, I wouldn't say an exodus of that strategy of no low cost, but all regional, but there is a certain move to regionalization. Personal experience, my CTO is looking for a laptop, a very powerful, little bit configured, high-end machine. I won't say the brand name right now, but it's been 3 weeks and it's still not here.
Okay.
Right? So think about it.
Yeah.
It is coming from China. It is going to fly in, we know that, but it's 3 weeks. I mean, luckily we are okay for now, but think about the other scenarios where there is a specific requirement here, but the brand loyalty, I think the instant gratification trumps brand loyalty in many cases, and I think the companies are taking a note of that.
I think what it underlines for me is the need to have that visibility, that transparency. You need your supply chains to be robust, but you need them to be flexible and agile at the same time. You need to balance that against the need to be economic, the need to keep inventory run turns down as low as you possibly can. But it's almost a group of conflicting issues. So do you think you see a period after this crisis where people actually sit down and say, okay, we've got a new bunch of criteria we need to design to, or is it like most of these big problems that we can quickly deal with the urgent and we forget about the important afterwards?
I do think this is going to be different. This time is going to be different for a couple of reasons. It was preceded by 2 years of turmoil and uncertainty around tariffs.
Yeah.
And that was not, a one-time event. It didn't just happen. It built up over time, and it's now become front and center in so many people's mind that this can happen again. And maybe today it's the U.S. and China, maybe tomorrow it's the U.K. and Korea. And so people are understanding that there are these global issues that can be triggered and that can last a very long time. And although they might not shut you down, the financial impact is such that maybe you'd rather be shut down than compensate for a 25 or 50% tariff. So I do think it is going to be different. And if I look at just kind of our inbound leads and who's calling us, what they're asking about, it really does feel different this time. It feels like, whether it's coronavirus or tariffs or whatever the next thing is, I have got to spread my eggs out. I've got to not be so deep in one basket. I've got to make sure that the few key suppliers that I've got that have got design wins in on semiconductors or connectors or whatever it is, that I better understand that they also have some of the flexibility I have to either avoid tariff or to avoid catastrophic events, whether it's a pandemic or some type of natural disaster. So I think it will be different, but let's talk next year
and see where we are. And and the bottom line is better software, better supply chain management, more visibility, more understanding. You can only adjust and work with what you can see. So that's where the challenge lies. Gentlemen, thanks for stopping by. Always a pleasure to chat. Enjoy the rest of the show, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.